Thank you for tuning in to the Hope.Strength.Courage podcast, love and support for parents whose kids are fighting for their lives. A weekly podcast created to support parents and caregivers of children diagnosed with cancer, where you will find resources collected to help you face each day with hope, strength, and courage. From interviews with the top experts in their fields, doctors, psychologists, chaplains, and inspiring frontline workers in pediatric oncology as they share their best advice, as well as day-to-day advice collected from other cancer moms and leaders in personal growth and development. From individuals who understand how hard it can be, I hope you will feel better prepared to cope with the day-to-day challenges of caring for your child. Hi, I am Laura Lane, and I am your host. My own daughter Celeste was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 12. In 2015, I wrote about our experiences in the book, Two Mothers, One Prayer, Facing Your Child's Cancer with Hope, Strength, and Courage. Since that time, I have dedicated thousands of hours to share with other parents and caregivers the resources, tools, tips, and skills and strategies I learned that helped our family stay happier, healthier, and more hopeful. My goal is to share with you my interviews with experts to support you as you care for a child with cancer. Today's episode features my interview with Jeff Golitz, stress solutions expert at the Institute of HeartMath. In our last episode, Marcy Scheimoth gave us a basic introduction to HeartMath when she shared with us how to change our brain chemistry and how to feel more balanced, centered, and open through a quick 2-minute exercise you can use anywhere. Well, this week, Jeff does a great job of explaining about the HeartMath Institute, how we can access depth of heart, and provides us with a daily reflective activity, which we can do with our children. A hands-on activity on how to create an inner weather report, as well as a heart-centered breathing exercises. I hope you will enjoy this interview as much as I did. I am pleased to formally introduce you to Jeff Golitz. Jeff Golitz is currently an education curriculum developer, senior trainer, and education specialist with the nonprofit Institute of HeartMath. He regularly consults with education professionals, mental health specialists, and parents around the United States and Canada to help improve the well-being of youth, parent-child communication, and classroom climate and performance. In the last 15 years, he has created and contributed to numerous educational curricula and programs designed to improve social and emotional learning. Jeff is the co-author of Using M-Wave Technology for Children with ADHD, the College De-Stress Handbook, Heart to Heart Communicating with Your Child, as well as Transforming Stress for Teens. As a stress solutions expert on howtolearn.com, he contributes ongoing articles and webinars on a variety of topics related to youth. Thank you, Jeff. I'm so pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here.
So if you could help us with an introduction into HeartMath and what it is you do, it would be great to help our audience to understand better about the HeartMath.
Absolutely. The HeartMath Institute is a nonprofit educational organization located in Northern California, about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. And we've been around since 1991. A lot of what we do is we bring the power of the heart in a way that is grounded and credible and sensible to the lives of people to help upgrade the quality of their lives, their decision makings, even their performance. We've also done a lot of science research on the results of those trainings and those strategies and tools and best practices, as well as published a lot of books. We also do a lot of public webinars. We have this incredible technology that trains people to get resilient, and I'll talk a little more about that later on. And I think there is also a whole research arm that would be of interest to people. We study actually kind of the electrophysiology of the brain, the body, and the heart. And the heart, as it turns out, is much more influential than we previously thought. It's more than just a pump, and I'll detail some of that information later on.
Well, that's great. Now, I've heard that you say that tragedy and challenge require a depth of heart. What do you mean by depth of heart, and how can we access depth of heart?
It's a really, really good question. If you think about heart, just the word heart, if you looked it up in Webster Dictionary, you'd probably see something along it's a physical organ inside us that pumps blood, and it certainly is that. It's a well-known function and feature. But if you looked a little farther down in the definitions, you'd see these metaphorical or even spiritual definitions, the core of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout history, throughout even global cultures, heart has this other meaning than just being the pump. When we're in the United States here and we salute the flag or we sing our national anthem, where do we put our hand? We put it on the heart, right in the center of our chest there. We're drawing on the power of the heart. It means we're sincere. We put a lot of feeling or emotion in it. And just to kind of look at some of the common language or metaphors in life that we hear. We commonly hear, listen to your heart, or go to your heart for the answer, or put your heart into it, or he has a great heart. So throughout history, and even now in our little rituals like the flag of allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance, or the singing the national anthem when we put our hand on the heart, or the language, we are referring to this power of the heart, source of intuition, wisdom, intelligence, more than just it being a metaphor, I would suggest. Not just something that is symbolic, but as I'll talk a little later on, some of the really interesting neuroscience emerging just on this subject. When we have tragedy and challenge, it helps us immensely if we can pull on that depth of who we are. What are our core values? What's most meaningful to us? What's the most important thing in our life? That's when we sort of let aside some of the normal distractions that everybody gets to. And we go to that deeper heart place for comfort, for wisdom, for intelligence, for answers, for clarity, or just almost even as a coping mechanism. We get this larger perspective going on, like this is a really challenging moment, especially if your child has cancer. For goodness sakes, that's a huge thing. It's a very primal, fundamental relationship, the relationship between a parent and the child, most fundamental relationship in nature. So to pull on the power of the heart is to get to that which is most important. The core is how they say it in France, which means courage.
Mm-hmm.
So heart gives us courage. It gives us wisdom. It gives us a resilience capacity that maybe we don't even know we have. But those kind of moments, we have to pull on our deeper resources to get through those really tough moments, or in the case of a child having cancer, ongoing difficult or challenging moments where your whole world is tilted. It's thrown aside, and your orientation becomes radically different, and everything else becomes meaningless other than that one primal relationship and getting you and your child through.
Mm-hmm. And so can you just sum up then how we access that depth of heart? Is it just that's the relationship, that's the depth of heart?
Well, it's a good question, and there's several ways to access your heart. One is you have to sort of let go of some of the noise inside our brains and our bodies, and that takes practice because we live in a very noisy, sometimes turbulent, sometimes stressful, sometimes very chaotic world. But letting go to some of that noise to sort of listen to the quiet, intuitive voice or feeling. And I'll share some techniques later on that have proven very, very useful to do that. And I think also just asking yourself on a daily basis, and it's really kind of a values question, is what's most important to me? And when you strip away some of all the day-to-day mundane stuff, and you get down to what is most important to me, and if you're not overthinking it with your analytical brain, you can access that deeper heart.
Okay.
So you have to initiate it. It's not going to land on your doorstep automatically in many cases. But you have to kind of ask yourself, what's most important, what's most meaningful to me? Usually it's family, usually it's your faith, usually it's some deeper love. And then you have to listen and be quiet so that the normal pulls of the day-to-day noise doesn't distract you.
So that's what other people would call going inward and reflecting, and so you're sort of coming into that core of who you are and what's most important. Okay, I understand what you're saying. That's what you mean, right?
It is what I mean, and I'll embellish that just a little more. Just imagine if anybody has had a real setback when you've got the bad news that your child has cancer, or there's someone in your family and who's ailing, and you feel grief, you feel deep sadness, and you're not necessarily going to do a bunch of busy work, or you can, but maybe you want to take a walk in the woods, or take a walk on the beach, or talk to a friend to get some perspective, maybe to get some compassion or understanding. It's when those kind of events happen, and we don't wish them on anybody, but it's part of life, tragedy, challenge. Life, in a way, if we follow its cue, will automatically help us to get to that deeper perspective without forcing it. And so you do go inside at those moments to ask those fundamental questions, to try to reach for some clarity or some release or some wisdom or some guidance, or you go to God, depending on your circumstance. So it's definitely that, and I would add the piece I would add is going to our heart. We're very specific about going to the heart region, away from the thinking brain. It's not just going to the body. We're talking about the area, the center of the chest. And there's a reason, there's a strategical reason from my point of view when we do the Pledge of Allegiance or we sing the national anthem, people are putting their hands on their heart or chest areas. It's not accidental. There's a depth of feeling, a depth of sincerity that we're drawing on, a power. We're not doing it with our kneecap. We're not doing it with our foot. We're not doing it with our stomach. We're not doing it with our ears. We're not even hardly doing it with our forehead. We're going to that part of the body. If I ask you, Lori, to point to yourself, who are you really? Or where's your soul located? Where might you point?
I guess most of the time when we point to ourselves, we point right to the middle of our chest. I've picked up both of my hands right now, put them together, and both of them are pointing towards the middle of my chest. That's what I do when I talk about me.
Why do we do that?
Good question. That must.
Or when we pray, we put our hands together. Aren't they oftentimes lodged right against the center of our chest?
Mm-hmm.
There's a depth of feeling, a depth of heart, a depth of a power of the heart that we're trying to draw on. Some aspect inside ourselves. Yes, we're all going inside, but I'm getting a little more geographically finessed here, talking about the power of the heart. And it's throughout our culture. You go back to the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, even the Greeks, even Aristotle. They talked about the power of the heart as the primary organ that influenced and directed our emotions, our morality, our decision-making. It's been over thousands of years that's going on. And then we kind of lost it a little bit when we got into brain development, cognition, the power of the brain.
Right.
And the heart almost became a passive organ. But lots of going on in the world of neuroscience to give us some new information about this, going back to sort of what the ancients or even the Middle Age thinkers were talking about, the power of the heart. So and again, I'll talk a little more about that later on, some of the really interesting neuroscience and the properties of the heart that would be really intriguing for your listeners to hear.
Well, why don't we get into that? My next question for you is, what are 3 key things that parents of children with cancer can do right now to become resilient and better support their children and families during difficult times? And I assume that will mean some of the things that you've been hinting at. Can you share those with
Yeah, indirectly. Well, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like the listeners right now to take out a piece of paper
Okay.
or a notebook
Mm-hmm.
and a writing instrument, whether it's a pencil or a pen. And I'm not asking you to take notes, but I want to guide you through some simple exercises.
Okay.
And it's best if you kind of be an active participant in this, because when you write it down on paper, it's going to help concretize it or internalize the activity.
Okay.
And one will be a reflective activity, and I'll call it inner weather and emotions, and this is something that you can do with your child. Daily exercise if you want. Then I'm going to guide you through a couple of techniques, simple techniques. And then in the very end, I'll even get a little more concrete with some other activities to do with you and your child, with the idea of bringing that power of the heart to yourself and your relationship with your child, but also as some strategies, some practices to use in your day-to-day life to help you cope with this very gut-wrenching, challenging situation that some of you find yourself in. I'm not trying to trivialize that for a second. That's why I talk about the depth or power of the heart. Tragedy and challenge oftentimes take us there, because we have to go deeper within to get the big perspective, because something's happened to us that is just very scary, very threatening. So to begin with that blank piece of paper or your notebook, I want you to write up at the very top the inner weather report. The inner weather report, 4 words.
Okay.
And underneath that, right in the top center, I want you to draw a vertical line that goes down about 4 or 5 inches, right down the center of the paper, from top to about maybe 2/3 the way down. Just a straight line, not on the edges,
Right.
but right down the center, vertical, top to bottom. And then cross that line, maybe 3 inches down, so there's 4 equal sized squares. I want you to draw a horizontal line. So there's a bit of a cross here.
Right. We now have 4 quadrants.
You have 4 quadrants. And let me talk a little bit about emotions, then I'm going to have the participants reflect on them. So every day we have emotions that come up. An emotion is like, simply said, it's like a kind of a psychophysical response inside the body, the brain, in response to life. It's energy in motion. We have many, many diverse emotions that happen throughout the day, and they have movement with them. If you look at emotere in the Latin, it means to move. So whenever we have emotion, it propels us. Another synonym is motivation, from motere. So it
Right.
drives us. And wherever our emotions are, oftentimes drives our attention. Make sense?
Yes.
Yep. So whatever you're feeling at that moment, whether it's happy or sad, whatever the object of that happiness or sadness is, that emotion will drive that attention. Emotions are very primal. Some emotions are really, we have a wide range of emotions. Upper left, we have those high energy depleting emotions like anger, frustration, high anxiety. The bottom quadrant, left quadrant, we have those low energy emotions that can deplete us, like boredom, anxiety, depression, grief. These are not good or bad. They happen to us. In many cases, we don't even choose these. They happen to us, and then we learn a lot from them. But to kind of go around the circuit here, we start with the high energy depleting emotions like anger and frustration. We have the lower left emotions like depression, grief, deep grief. Sometimes deep grief will be so strong it's in the upper left. And then we have the lower right quadrant, more like calm, peace. And upper right is like joy, excitement. So we have, every day we have a range of emotions that show up. A lot of times we're not conscious of them. When we are conscious of them, sometimes we can feel in our bodies, and they can be really loud if we're really, really upset. So right now, it's very understandable, a lot of the parents who are listening to this right now, they're in grief or worry or anxiety or fear. A very natural response. In fact, it would be worrisome if there weren't those kinds of emotions. So they're perfectly natural and healthy and understandable. Okay. But they vary. Our lives are varied. They're not just one flat line. And we have a wide range of emotions that go on. So from a HeartMath perspective, emotions can really affect our perception, our well-being, even our thinking process. So one thing you can do daily for yourself, but also with your child, is do an inner weather report. And what I want the participants to do right now is just take the last couple of days, reflect on your days, and try to place those emotions in the right quadrant. So you have the upper left, the high energy emotions like anxiety, frustration, anger. The lower left ones could be grief, sadness, depression, disappointment. The bottom right ones, peace, calm, compassion. And the upper right ones like excitement or joy. Not good or bad, but just as an exercise, think of 4 or 5 emotions from the last few days, and understandably there would be the ones of depression and grief and worry. But I would also suggest there are other ones, other kinds of emotions. Could be joy, just seeing your child, see the sparkle in the child's eyes, or appreciation and gratitude for some of the medical people that you have, or family members who are pouring out their heart. Wide range of emotions. So just take a minute or two to reflect on those, and then we'll kind of pull everything together after you've done that.
And our audience has the opportunity that they can pause this recording and sit and do this for a few minutes, and then press play again and then come back to you.
Very good. So emotions tell a story. They're in response to a life event. Many of the stories we tell each other have some kind of an emotion as a thread through it. So with this range of emotions, it is healthy in an appropriate way to talk about your inner weather. It's something you can discuss with your child, and your child will most likely have an authenticity. There's a lot at stake here, so there's not going to be a lot of, perhaps, a lot of filters. At the same time, you want to be appropriate and not every day go to the grief or depression. There's many sides to us. But this is a healthy way of having some honest, but maybe even non-threatening communication about that which is going on inside.
Right.
And what this does is it builds up a deep heart vulnerability, but maybe with a little bit of dispassion. It kind of can diminish the intensity as we talk about it, and there's a depth of communication going back and forth. So you can ask your child, well, what's your inner weather report today? Why don't you go first, then I'll share. And again, you can kind of diffuse it a little bit with the kind of the humor of the day, because you went shopping and somebody spilled their groceries, and they got upset, and you had compassion for that person, or somebody did something really silly and it was funny and it just brought out the lightness of life. So it's a range of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
None of them are good or bad. Now, ideally, as we move to another strategy, we want to be as heart present with our child. Because the child will pick up from us, they'll pick up our emotions. Emotions, by their very nature, are contagious.
Yeah.
We can walk into a room and we can feel, if we're paying attention, sometimes we can feel what another person's feeling. We can't lie our way through that. Somebody wears their heart on the sleeve, so to speak. So with any understandable grief, it's not about to repress it, but you want to almost bilocate with it and bring the right side of the quadrant of the emotions to your child as well. Because your child's going to worry, potentially, they may worry about you a lot. They sense your emotions and they can be upset. So the inner weather report gives a little bit of a structured authenticity, and it gives also a release and objectivity about it. You could do it over several days. And again, I would be cautionary, do it appropriately here. Maybe uncomfortable for some of you to discuss this, so you want to do it in modest doses, or it may be so uncomfortable that you won't even choose to do it at all. And I get that. It's new to some of you. Some of you are not wired or have not had exposure to this kind of activity, so I want to be very sympathetic to that choice.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be something you do it and dial on yourself, just again to get that more objective look. Make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So that leads to a technique, a strategy. And this is a strategy to de-escalate sometimes the intensity of our emotions, knowing that grief and tragedy can have a shocking intensity that just does not disappear. It's in the body for a while, and it's a natural response to a very threatening situation. But but emotions, by their very nature, they modulate. They go in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So with something like heart-focused breathing, you can gain a little bit of composure, a little bit more of poise. There's still that sadness, and that sadness is legitimate. But you can bring that brightness, if you will, the bright aspect of you, to the situation while honoring the grief, almost like a simultaneous process. Heart-focused breathing has some really simple steps. And I'm actually going to read them because I try to kind of keep honor the steps here, if you will. So first of all, you try to find a place where you can be quiet when you're initially practicing it, because it may be foreign to some of you. You focus your attention in the area of the heart or the center of the chest. Imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. And if you want, you can inhale for 4 or 5 seconds. That could be a little long for some of you. Exhale for 4 or 5 seconds, or whatever rhythm is comfortable. And the idea here, again, is not to repress sadness or grief, but to help you to have some perspective and compassion for yourself in the situation. Very, very important. And it may sound like a nuanced point. I'm not here to deny or repress grief. Please do not leave with that impression. It's actually honoring the grief, but bringing it to the power of the heart, if you will, to get more perspective, maybe a little more self-control. Make sense?
Yes.
Very clear. I want to just be really super clear. I'm not talking about denying or repressing grief, but honoring the grief. And here's a way you can take it into the heart. Breathe through it so you have some degree of self-control when needed. We're all going to have our moments when we're really, really upset. But you can bring more of your composure and poise to your child, where your child wants you to be. And that way there's more of an energetic care, if you will. So that's heart-focused breathing. And it takes practice. You can do it, but you could do it with the eyes open or eyes closed. You can do it in conjunction with prayer. Go to the power of the heart and do some deep prayer. Draw on that power of the heart to strengthen your prayer. It's almost like a sacred moment, if you will, and access that power of the heart. Then there's an extension of this. It's called quick coherence, where you can add, in addition to doing heart-focused breathing, you can add a renewing feeling like love, gratitude, appreciation. Not gratitude or appreciation for the circumstance, which is gut-wrenchingly challenging, but for life itself, for the support, the love, the beauty of your child, the medical care, perhaps. Medical care can be a complicated subject, very draining subject. But you try to breathe in through your heart. Maybe it's compassion. You draw in the power of compassion. Have compassion on yourself. Have compassion for other family members who are really struggling. Just bring in that depth, that composure, that poise. Maybe there's even a little sweetness that kind of is simultaneous with some deep sadness, almost a bitter sweetness, if you will, or that deep sadness. And you just it takes practice. You have to do it a couple times a day. Strategically, carve out some moments. Maybe you're in the hospital waiting room, you're just waiting. You just you're praying, you're breathing through the heart, you're trying to draw on the power of the heart to help you cope with this difficult situation. It does take some persistence to kind of get good at it, and not just one and done when you need it the most, when things are really, really hard. It's a skill set. It's a practice. It's a strategy. So the heart-focused breathing, just the simple breathing through the heart or chest area, in and out 4 or 5 seconds. Maybe do it for a minute or two, just to kind of quiet down some of the noise of the world and all the craziness that can go on. Then the quick coherence, add in a layer of something you appreciate or compassion, or maybe you're trying to breathe in patience for the medical personnel who are crazy busy and not as responsive as they can be, and they're overwhelmed. So you're trying to breathe in patience for all those around you. So that way you're bringing the best of who you are to the situation at hand. That makes sense.
No, that's beautiful. That's such a good reminder.
And then there's one more tool I'll share. It's called heart lock-in. Heart lock-in. You want to lock into the heart. This does take practice. You build on the heart-focused breathing through the heart or chest area. You try to add a feeling of love or patience or kindness or compassion. And then you want to take that feeling and radiate it out like almost like you're a heater or a sun. Not in a pretentious way. You do it from your heart, not your head. And again, this could be really foreign or even weird to some of you who are listening. I do get that. But putting out into your environment that love, that compassion, that kindness, especially for those who are struggling. You're going to be modeling energetically for them. If you can do this, if you're capable, and some people might not because the grief process is overwhelming. But in those moments when you can, you want to pull on that power, that strength of your heart, and send that out, model it energetically through your body language, through your composure, that love, that graciousness, grace under fire, if you will, that poise, that inner beauty, maturity, wisdom. And it's so helpful when there are moments of grief or challenge like that, especially among other people. And we probably all have models of people who have done that, who have been just incredibly gracious under duress. So that's a goal. That could be a really like climbing a mountain for some of you. It does take practice. And there's a great book out called Heart Intelligence. You can get it on Amazon, Heart Intelligence, that talks about the power of the heart and some of these very strategies that I'm talking about, but in more nuanced ways, not these just do this and that will happen. That's not life. You don't push a button and magic happens or a panacea happens. It takes effort, sustained practice, especially if it's new to you. And so heart locking, you're actually radiating out love, compassion, patience, calmness, ease. And you could look sometimes, maybe you get really mad at the medical personnel. They're just not responsive, or you even think they're incompetent. Maybe you get judgmental and so frustrated with them. And maybe there's some validity to what you're saying. But this can help take off some of that edge. Just breathing through the heart, breathing in more patience. Try to be as civil and dignified as you can in these very trying circumstances. Does
Jeff,
that make sense, Lori?
Yeah, it does. And it sounds to me, Jeff, that these are just, it sounds like a great tool that I think a lot of times when we're under stress, we turn to less effective things to calm ourselves. When we're worried, stressed out, angry, it's easy to turn to things that become addictive. So it could be, I have to have a glass of wine every night to unwind, or a beer. It could be people turning to a cigarette, to even social media, being addicted to just spending time doing things that are not productive to them, that they're getting a dopamine hit instead of actually learning a real technique to help them to get through.
You're right. I think everything in balance. Everything you said that has its place, time and place. A good glass of wine.
Yeah.
In the
when we
midst
turn
of,
to it repeatedly in order to cope with something or to change our emotions around, versus being an enjoyable activity.
Yeah, exactly. So these are strategies that are employed by HeartMath in many, many different areas of life for people that are at risk, ranging from soldiers who have trauma, PTSD, hurricane victims, people that are in acute poverty with a lot of just misery, actually, and struggling to try to find hope in the midst of darkness, let alone people in their day-to-day lives who are overwhelmed or have anxiety. And so these very practical strategies that are shared, they're not going to land on your doorstep. You do have to do them. But the research out there is very strong, not just our research, but research from many independent people, independent peer-reviewed journals and organizations have shown some really successful results with these strategies done in balance with the circumstances that the listeners are facing. So there's got to be perspective. And I'll just share briefly a little bit of the science of the heart, which I think is, I'll try to simplify it, and I think this will be really, really fascinating. So just to broaden it a little bit, that there's more to the heart than being just a pump, or when we would suggest more to it than just being a metaphor. We did some research in the American Journal of Cardiology back in 1995. And in that research, we showed that when you have different emotions, anger versus, let's say, gratitude. It shows up differently in what are called your heart rhythms. Every time your heart beats, it has a certain flow, and if you look at the time between heartbeats, this gets a little complicated, called heart rate variability. There's a pattern, and it's not heart rate, it's called heart rhythm.
Right.
And the heart constantly is communicating to the brain, along with the brain communicating with the heart. People might not know that actually the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. It's up what's called the vagus nerve, these circuits that line the front of our chest and go up to the lower brain and all the way up to the upper brain from the heart and the body. So we look at the signals that the heart is generating, called heart rate variability, technically speaking. And if those signals are chaotic, like when we're frustrated or angry, they will ascend up the nervous system, what's called the vagal nerves, to the brain. And the brain is called cortical inhibition. We can't think as well. It's like trying to do a math problem when you're frustrated.
Right.
You can't access that part of your brain. So what we're suggesting is the quality of emotion, that's why I started with the inner weather report, affects those signals, whether they're chaotic or not. And we're all going to, life is life. Life happens. We're all going to have chaos. We're all going to fall flat in our face. We're going to be all over the map. But can we increase the ratios of that coherence and being in sync? And so the heart, just a couple other things. The heart has its own complex intrinsic nervous system called the heart brain. That's not our language at HeartMath. It's actually what somebody called a neurocardiologist who studies the nervous system of the heart. Yes, the heart has a nervous system, has all sorts of neurons and dendrites, just like the brain has, but well, the brain is the thinking instrument, let's be honest about that.
Mm-hmm.
But processes information independent of the thinking brain. And again, what we're saying, this quality of the signals that the heart sends to the brain affect our decision-making, coordination, reaction times, so forth, so forth. This is all laid out quite exquisitely in the book Heart Intelligence. Also, if some of the parents want, and this is done a lot with children as well, children that are about 6 or 7 and above, there's some really cool technology called the Inner Balance technology for iPhones only. They have a handheld device called the M-Wave 2 that's for Samsung, or for people who don't have an iPhone. And what it does is it trains users, both parents and children, to get in sync, to kind of do that rhythmic breathing I talked about earlier, and then you get these windows of feedback, non-medical, non-invasive. Just put a little clip on your ear, and it measures it. All research-based. Takes practice, but it's just a way of actually training you to build up your composure and calm. Not magic potion, not a panacea, but well proven out in many circumstances to be effective when done over time. So that might be a fun. It's a little on the pricey side. So if you want to email me and we can maybe talk about that for your particular needs. I think it's $129 retail for the Inner Balance. And then there's also it's a game called the Wild Ride to the Heart, which is a game board for kids, 4 to 8. It's a game of how to get to the heart first, but it's got all sorts of twists and turns, adventures, setbacks, disappointments, and actually teaches kids use the language of emotions to talk about them.
Oh, very good.
So Heart Intelligence, some of our technology found at HeartMath.org, or a game like Wild Ride to the Heart are options if you go to www.heartmath.org, our nonprofit name.
Well, that's great. That was going to be my last question for you was what website can we send our audience to so they can learn more about HeartMath? So can you repeat that one more time? And we'll be sure to also include the link below this interview for people to click on. So that is?
It's www.HeartMath, that's heart that beats in your chest, math, 1 and 1 is 2, so HeartMath, all one word, .org.
.org. Okay, great. Well, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Jeff. This has been a pleasure to learn all of these things. I'm going to look up that book, Heart Intelligence. That sounds terrific. And you've certainly taught me a number of things on this call. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure our audience is going to really appreciate it. And listening to your voice is so calming and soothing, and doing the breathing exercises and this inner weather report. This is terrific. Thank you so much.
Well, Lori, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be on the phone with you, and it's a very important service you're offering to the parents and listeners. You do have to draw on the power of the heart to endure or cope with that situation, and hopefully there's some skill sets or some ideas and practices that have been useful. Pick and choose that which is appropriate for you as you are facing this challenging time. There is a power in the heart. It's just lying, waiting, but we have to pursue it to kind of pull it close to us and access it.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And I look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Lori, thanks so much for having me. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now.
What I love most about this interview with Jeff is how we got into the discussion with the reminder of the importance of taking time to ask the question, what is most important to me? To sink into that depth of heart. As I reviewed this interview again, and I'll be honest, it was a while ago when he and I had this conversation, it was such a good reminder to me that when things get tough, I do need to take the time to go inwards and reflect. That is the best way and so necessary to connect back to the heart. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. It really is one of my favorites. As I said before, I really appreciate the reminder to go inwards, to focus on the heart, focus on what we are feeling right now, to use our breathing as an opportunity to breathe in positive emotions, and then sending that peace, that calm, gratitude out to those around us. Such wonderful reminders. I hope you too will take the time to practice the strategies Jeff shared with us. To learn more about Jeff Golitz and the work he does, you can visit his website at www.heartmath.org. That's HeartMath.org. Please join me next week for part 1 of my interview with pediatric oncologist and podcast host, Dr. Jeff McCowage, as we discuss how to get the best help from your medical team when your child is first diagnosed with cancer. Before we end our show today, we have one last segment. Over the last few years, I have asked other cancer moms what advice they wish they had known when their child was first diagnosed. I have compiled that information and will be sharing their advice each week. You can download the top 101 piece of advice that I put together in a mini ebook at www.lauralane.ca/advice. Today's advice comes from Nerisse. She said, I was told to accept any help offered to me and not to be proud or whatever. Say yes. And I did, and I'm glad I did. Yes, please, and thank you. Thanks, Nerisse, for sharing that. It's so important. So many people want to help us when we're struggling, and we just need to say yes and let them and say thank you. If you have advice you've learned along the way that you wish someone had told you weeks, months, or years earlier, I invite you to fill out the contact form on our website at www.lauralane.ca/advice, and I will be sharing your advice with our listeners on future shows. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to listen to the Hope, Strength, Courage podcast. I look forward to sharing more experts and advice with you again next Wednesday. Please remember to take a minute to subscribe to the show. Thanks also need to go out to our Hope, Strength, Courage production team, which consists of my wonderful assistant, Tracy Ogilvy McDonald, Andrew Braun at Braun Audio and Audio Geek, music by Fizz Anthony, social media support by Marife Constantino, and graphic design by Amy Hosmer. To learn more about myself, Laura Lane, and to order my book, please visit lauralane.ca.